Hey Sarah, do you mind emailing out the action plan? I was able to pull it up on my phone, but don't know how to find it on here.
Yeah. Also, my computer crashed today. So if somebody could share screen, that would be. I can't present it, but I can like talk about it if that's helpful.
Okay.
But I can email it too.
Councilmember Reed, would you mind screen sharing?
I'm not capable of doing that. I'm on a phone.
Yeah, I'm on the phone too. Hold on, let me try to pull up. For those joining us, we're gonna start around 6:05. We're just trying to work through.
Can I put the link to it in the chat instead of email or?
Yes, you could do that, and then I'll pull it up.
Okay.
Oh, video. Got it. Sorry, y'all. Okay. That should be straight down. Can you drop it in the chat one more time, Sarah? I'll see it. I just put it under my computer. No problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's see if I figure out how to screen share content.
Hey all, I just wanted to say hi. I'm gonna stay off camera tonight. I'm battling a sinus infection and I'm 37 weeks pregnant. So just all in all, just feeling like a real superstar over here. Y'all don't need to see any of what's going on. So, but I am here and I'm listening. So
No, take care of yourself.
thanks.
Matthew, I think this is your first meeting. If you want to one, quickly introduce yourself to the group, that would be great. And I don't know if you can help us out with screen sharing or make it so I can share my screen. But we have a presentation today.
Hello, everyone. I am a graduate fellow in the city manager's office, and I am helping support the Reimagining Public Safety Committee. And I will get to work trying to figure out how to make it so you can share your screen. Is there that you, Councilmember Burns, who needs to be able to share their screen, or is there someone else?
You can, Sarah, you're not able to do it. You want me to? I can't remember.
I'm on my phone.
Okay. Yeah, if you can.
No.
You can. Yeah, you can. If you allow me to do it, I can share my screen.
Okay.
Thanks. I thought your glasses was blue or purple for a second. I was gonna say that's super fly, but
No, yeah, the blue light glasses reflect the computer light back, so it can't see me.
Welcome to the city, man. All right. Okay, so while we get this going, again, this is a subcommittee, Rethinking the Organizational Structure, a subcommittee of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee meeting. Today, we have one of our committee members, but also a member of Evanston Fight for Black Lives, Sarah Bogan, who is going to walk us through their action plan, their defund and action plan that includes many recommendations that would have a fundamental impact on the organizational structure of the Evanston Police Department, which is why I felt like it's really important to have their voice and their ideas included in this ongoing conversation that we're having. We're trying to change the permission so I can share my screen. And actually, Matthew, I'm logged in with my phone, but also under another device. So if you could enable it if you could tell which one is I think it's maybe Freeze iPad. I think that's it. I should know what it is, but I think it's Freeze iPad. I think that's it.
Is it the document in the chat?
It is. You want to just share it from your end?
Yeah, I think so, because
okay.
I'm having it.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Cool. So Matthew's going to start sharing the screen. The document is also in the chat, so feel free you can access it on your phone, iPad, whatever device you're on. But the document, the action plan that we're going to take a look at is also in the chat. Yeah, so let's jump right into it. Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself and the organization and a little bit about the action plan, and then feel free to guide us through it however you think is best.
Thanks. My name is Sarah Bogan. I'm an organizer for Evanston Fight for Black Lives. Last summer, we worked with someone. They would like to remain anonymous, but their pseudonym is T.S. Mayaki. And we wrote a 27-page action plan for how to defund EPD and effectively reorganize it financially and position-wise, so that we're not harming Black and Brown community members anymore. I've lived in Evanston my entire life. I graduated from University of Illinois a little over a year ago with a degree in education policy. And now I live in the city of Chicago working with the nonprofit. That's just about me. So we can start. It's a very long document, so I won't go through the whole thing because the first half is really an introduction, background and evidence on police misconduct and harm caused in Evanston to Black residents. Evanston Fight for Black Lives is an abolitionist organization, so we believe that policing is inherently racist and that reform ultimately won't solve the issues we're working towards. We have to eventually completely rebuild this institution. But these are some steps that we can take towards that. Defunding is the first step towards abolition. And I'll also say that this took us a long time. It took us months to make, and it got zero use, or, you know, this is the first time that it's being like seriously introduced as anything Evanston could use, which is very exciting. But that being said, we have not put any more work into it since it didn't have much of an outcome. And so it's a little outdated in terms of alderman stance or council member stances. And it's talking about the 2020 budget, not the upcoming 2022 budget. So things like that will be updated if this becomes a serious document that we could look at again. And then, yeah, so if you could scroll down to how to begin the defunding process, that would be great. So the philosophy of, and I recommend everyone reads it after this to get the details. I'm really just giving an overview, but this is based off of TS's model. She was an RA and worked on a college campus for 6 years. And so the philosophy of this plan is based on how higher education handles responding to like emergency response. And they always do it unarmed and with a focus on de-escalation rather than force. And yeah, so also working on holding officers accountable before harm or death or injury has occurred rather than after. And so part one, I'm sorry, I'm having a, if you can scroll to part one, just so we can use the document as we go, is talking about focusing on mental health, drug misuse, and then sexual and domestic violence. Or sorry, yeah, you passed, you had it at the top. The headings are kind of not easy to see. Yeah, perfect. So we've broken down the department into having funds going into programs based on the types of calls and emergency situations that officers are expected to report on. And part of this is working towards mitigating the root causes of issues to prevent the emergency calls from happening, but then also how officers would respond when they get the call. So we are working from the basis that officers and people in public safety should have far more expertise and training than they do, because right now officers are not equipped to handle what they're happening. So for sexual violence specialists, they would have a minimum of a bachelor's degree in sociology or a related field, and then specific knowledge and training as it relates to sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and a certificate from a certified sexual violence training program. These officers would be unarmed. They would be and responding to calls. If they would have the option to have an armed officer, but they would be leading the call. And then we have mental health, drug, and alcohol abuse specialists. These officers would have, again, either an associate's or bachelor's degree in psychology or sociology, drug abuse, a related field, and extreme expertise in how to handle people who are experiencing this. And again, they would also be unarmed, have the option to bring an armed officer at their discretion. So depending on the type of call they're getting, what they think they're responding to, if they feel that they might be dealing with a violent person, then that would be a time to call in someone who's armed. But for the most part, these responses aren't happening with weapons.
And Sarah, quick question, just
Yeah.
so I understand, with this, do you see this role being a part of the Evanston Police Department or some new department or the health department? What was your organization thinking about where these positions are located?
Yeah, so the idea would be, and this is I guess the order of this document might not be in the best order, but the idea is that we would analyze every officer that currently works for EPD, and gauge their willingness to adapt to this new public safety department. We wouldn't call it, I don't want to call it policing, because we want to change it, right? But it would be the current system that exists, just completely changing it. So if officers are willing to and also part of it is that the funding, what we're talking about, part of defunding would be putting a lot of funds towards the education that is required to fill these positions. So if officers are interested and willing to work for this new entity and are truly committed to public safety, then they would go on to get whatever education certificate further that's necessary, and that would come from the police department. Like that'd be part of the rerouting of funds for the transition period of however long that takes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be, and it would also be, would these folks have to be officers, or can they be alternate? It could be either. So it's if officers are willing to go get the education, or if we can hire outside people who already have this expertise. And yeah, if that makes sense. And please stop me and ask questions at any point. And so, yeah, part 2 is how we would reorganize all of the departments. So this part is really about addressing the misuse of the police union to protect problematic officers and departments, and really making sure that as a whole, their interests are for the residents and not each other. And so when we look at like police chiefs and the lieutenants and the people who are in charge, those people, if you scroll down, there's a list of, yeah. So right there's perfect, sorry. A little higher, sorry. Just under, if you see police chief, lieutenant. Yeah. So they would have, again, associates or bachelor's degree. And these are people who we would expect to have already a lot of experience in policing. They've already had to respond to domestic violence calls, to drug misuse. And so just kind of furthering their education and training in cultural competency, all of that, so that they are able to then train officers under. So conflict resolution officers would be ones who respond to less risky calls. So noise complaints, disturbances, traffic accidents, things where you're not gonna need a weapon to be there. These are unarmed officers. They would have the option to bring in the tactical officers, the armed officers, same as the sexual assault and drug misuse officers. But these people, for the most part, would be unarmed and using their discretion of when they need to call in an armed officer in case. And again, they would be leading the charge. The armed officer is there as just as backup. That's the tactical officers and detectives. Those are the people who are responding to the more serious crimes where we would need potentially a weapon. But this is where we would have to explore training officers in jujitsu or hand-to-hand combat, or things where we're giving them the tools where the weapon is truly, truly the last resort. And then having a chief diversity and equity and inclusion officer. This person wouldn't be within the ranks of the department, but they would report directly to the mayor or city manager. And they are someone with extreme knowledge, education, and experience with diversity, inclusion, race, pedagogy, social justice theory. And they are monitoring the entire department to make sure that everyone's on their P's and Q's.
And do you see that position as, again, part of this new department, or an outside entity, maybe that reports directly to council or to the city manager, or how do you see that working?
Yeah, this person would be an outside. This person would not be, I mean, in terms of, are we talking in terms of salary and who they report to? They would be reporting directly to city manager or mayor or council, not the chief of the public.
Kimberly Walton had a question. Kim, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Nice to read this. Thanks for all the thought. I just wanted to say that I think so I'm on the Equity and Empowerment Committee, and we got a report about something in the city called the Ready Committee. Council member Burns, I don't know if you heard about that or if they've given you all a report, but it's kind of something that Kimberly Richardson is leading, and it's a journey in terms of bringing diversity, equity, and inclusion practices and frameworks into the city. And they do have some representatives on there from the police department. So I just wonder if, they're looking to pilot, I think, some projects. So I just wonder if there might be an opportunity to see if there is some willingness and some support in terms of what they're already doing through the Ready Committee and the vision that they are trying to pursue, as far as, the police that they already have participating, and just general support for how this might look if we were to actually pursue this. I love it. I think it's a good idea. And then the other thing I was going to mention as well is I'm on the other work group, one of the other work groups. I'm forgetting our name, violence prevention. And we have been talking broadly about an Office of Neighborhood Safety. And so I wonder if you might think that any of these roles you have here could fit within a framework of something like that, where, we haven't really figured out if it's part of the police department or if it's a separate department or whatever, but we've seen some successful models where there's this Office of Neighborhood Safety concept. And it sounds like there are some parallels here. And so I just wondered if you had heard of that, and if you thought that the roles and responsibilities here could potentially fit in an Office of Neighborhood Safety, if the other work group were to recommend that.
Sarah, if you can speak to the second part, and then I can speak to the first part. Yeah.
I'm not aware of that, of like the details of that, but I definitely think it could be possible. I think one thing that would, I feel like it's important that it's a cohesive department. I feel like if we separate these roles into a bunch of different, departments not working together, that could pose some risks, I think, of people who has more power, who has more say. Our tactical officers and detectives just, I don't know. I think that it definitely is worth a conversation, and trying to combine this with what's already happening and what's already in conversation, and how we can, like I said, we wrote this over a year ago, before anything on this committee has started happening. So it can definitely be adapted and shifted, and we can try and make things work together. I definitely think we shouldn't silo off into a bunch of different community safety things while we still have EPD leading the charge.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, I think we can have the committee. That's, I believe, Kim, as you said, an internal committee that is of staff that's organizing themselves around some equity goals, and we can certainly have them on potentially for a future meeting to give us a similar presentation that they provided the equity committee, so we can work on that. But Sarah, if you want to, for the sake of time, if you want to continue, but thanks for those questions, Kim. Those are good questions.
Yeah, I don't have much more. So if you just scroll down, I think the hiring process is interesting. So hiring and recruitment changes. I'm just honestly going to read these really quickly, but so all officers, all police officer searches would take place with at least 3 people, including the police chief and the hiring manager. Interview questions would be created and used for all candidates who are screened across all roles, and they would be made with the person in charge of equity and inclusion, as well as an outside contractor. And interviews would have case study scenarios with rubrics that are focused on policing in Black and Brown communities, and they would be assessing how officers are with prioritizing de-escalation techniques and using their cultural competency education and problem solving without weapons. And I think, and then if you go to the bottom, it's having the public also be a part of, not the whole public, but members of the community are a part of this hiring process as well. And it starts with, again, auditing the entire police department and seeing who is willing to go get further educated, complete these certificates. I like putting money towards more training without completely like implementing these educational minimums. We just don't believe that it will actually be effective. No matter how much people are kind and nice and want to be protective of their community, if we're not trained, everyone has biases. If people aren't educated, if we're not setting the bar extremely high, we're going to just continue to experience violence and harm. And that would happen with interviews, where officers stand on the Black Lives Matter movement, on Black lives in general. That could be done with the bias test. That can be done. Also, every single officer's history should be looked at. And if they have a history of violence or targeting or harming people of color in the community, that's termination, unless they're willing to address their biases, continue education. I think in summary, the main goal of this plan is to require a lot more of officers to be qualified to work in this setting. Yeah. So and then the second is the document finishes with where to put the reallocated funds. We push for Parks and Rec, Health and Human Services, and in the education of the officers. Again, I would encourage everyone to actually read this document, because this is this is definitely a high level summary. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, let's open it up first. Committee members, I think we have Kim, Councilmember Reed. Do you have any questions? And if not, we're going to kick it out to the community at large for questions.
I'll just once again say thank you, Sarah. This is a great presentation, as well as thank you to the entire group for taking the labor of putting this together.
I'm on the meeting, back up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And then community at large, anybody who has taken the time to join us this evening, which I truly appreciate. Kadeen, if that's your how you pronounce it. I know you mentioned something earlier, so if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect pronunciation. And thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate reading this. One question I had was in terms of, so if there are officers who want to take advantage of the opportunity to get a different degree and they're willing to be trained, where would the savings come from? Is it the idea that it would come from for officers who decide that's not what they want to do and leave? Like, where would that savings come from?
Yeah, that would ideally come from the police budget. So in reallocating, I mean, I don't know what, it's like the chicken and the egg. I don't know what comes first. I think it would first be auditing the department, recognizing who, first of all, is not harmed people, overly harmed Black and brown people, and is qualified to offer to want to continue. And then, figuring out where they want to be, if they want to be in the mental health, sexual violence, or if they want to be in drug misuse, if they want to be a tactical officer, of all those, where people want to be, and then recognizing what education background they already have, what needs to be furthered, and then looking at the budget as a whole of how are we redirecting funds to make sure that we're getting necessary personnel. But I also think pushing for people who already have those qualifications is also going to be like one of the stronger ways to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Darlene.
Yes. Thank you. I'm wondering, what is this committee's feelings, or how they feel about the possibility of the 7 open police positions, about them being filled this year? Because they were talking about that in the budget, and they're talking about the need to fill those positions. I know many of them are administrative, and I think at least 1 or 2 are actually actually, police officers that are street police officers. So I'd like to understand what's, the committee's, I guess, position in regards to that. Thank you.
Councilman Reed, I know you brought this up in our last council meeting. I don't know if you want to provide a quick kind of summary of what is on the agenda. Or I'm sorry,
Sure,
what
and
is
then
the budget, proposed budget, and what your comments were around it at the last special city council meeting?
yeah, I'll just very quick, and then I see that Sarah wants to chime in. So yes, you're right. The majority of the positions are civilian positions. So I personally am somewhat supportive of those positions. But there are 3 positions, 2 management level positions, and 1 patrol officer position that are to be filled. And so I have requested and will request that the police officer position be held vacant.
Thank you. I do have one more question. Sorry. Also, I was just trying to see what's I guess the status, or what's your position on police officers at ETHS. I understand, what District 65's position is, and I think that the police officers aren't there anymore, but I understand that they're still at ETHS. So if you can tell me what, this committee or your position is on that too. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we have it coming up for a discussion in some sense, in that I believe, so Councilmember Reed put in a referral to have a discussion about the SRO program at District 202. And then I believe, and Councilmember Reed, correct me if I'm wrong, but Councilmember Fleming submitted or requested a budget memo that would also prompt a discussion about the SRO program. But in terms of my personal opinion, I appreciate Sarah and other members of Evanston Fight for Black Lives. They put out a candidate questionnaire during the election, and I believe, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the questions was, would you vote on a budget that had the SRO, the 202 SRO program in there? And I said I would not, and I plan to stick to that commitment. And Councilmember Reed, I don't know if you want to speak to the topic, but in a much broader sense, we are going to have a discussion about it coming up at some point once the memo is provided by city staff.
And personally, just for the first question on the 7 positions, I think all should be held open, considering that EPD has so much human labor per residential. Like, we have the largest amount of officers per residents. And I think that if we're a committee that is supposed to be reimagining the structure, it doesn't make sense to me to be continuing to bring on new people, especially if we're trying to actually implement a plan like this, where we're auditing every role and where people stand. If we hire someone and then they're not a fit for this new plan, what happens then? So I personally think that all positions should be held open until, as a committee, we've decided what to do with them. And yeah, I'm part of Evanston Fight for Black Lives, and I'm definitely against SROs and ETHS.
I will just chime in and say that particularly, Sarah brings up a good point, and it's made me think that maybe even the commander positions or the management positions should be held as well, since we are in the process of hiring a new police chief. And before we promote folks, maybe we should provide that opportunity to the new police chief and hold those vacant as well.
I think another important part is, I think we heard from the police union at our last special city council meeting. And I think part of what is not being discussed is that the plan, although we don't really have a plan right now to do it, but we need one, is to shift responsibility away from our police department into some other department to respond to well-being checks and other calls that, again, don't require an armed officer. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten far enough in that process. We posted an RFP for our alternative emergency response program or system, and didn't get a lot or any responses to that RFP, and that was to contract out the work. I am of the belief that this should be something similar to, I think, what Evanston Fight for Black Lives calls for, that should be within our own department. I don't think this is work that we should contract out for. The risk there is if the organization we contract with has a large coverage area that they serve, well-being checks and other really important calls could go unaddressed, and we may not have folks responding to them, which is definitely not what we want to do. We want to send the right public servants to each call in a timely manner. And in fact, we should be, which I don't know if we have this now, but there should be performance metrics that are public, posted on our website, that let us know as a community, like how quickly we are getting to these calls, and not just anybody, but a public servant that is trained to respond to these calls. So I think that's one of the problems, that the police department as it exists today is saying, look, we still have all of these responsibilities, and until we shift it to another department or shift the responsibility to some other group or entity, we're still the ones responding to these calls. And so it's up to us as a council to say, look, this is the alternative option, and we need to move. We have funding for it, and we understand how to work it into our current budget, and we need to move forward in doing so. I don't think we're there yet, but we need to be, and hopefully we can get there in this year's budget conversation. Councilman Reed, I don't know if you have any other thoughts, but beyond that too, we can open up to any other questions or comments. I see somebody might have written in the chat. There are still SROs associated with District 5. They're no longer in the buildings. There are still SROs associated with District 5. They're no longer in the buildings. I don't really understand that. Jenny, if you want to elaborate on that comment, I think we have Anya here on the call who could clarify anything we need. But if you want to start with just clarifying your comment.
The budget is 4 officers. The last year's and this year. So 2 are in, my understanding is 2 are at ETHS and 2 are with District 65. They have an SRO plan. So it seems clear to me that that's what's happening. So if we're deciding, how to divvy out officers, the question is, why do we need them? Is that a place to save money?
This is Anya.
Yeah.
Yes, this is Anya from District 65. I'm not necessarily here in that capacity, but I can clarify that in 2019, we did make the decision as a board to ask that SROs be removed from our campuses in terms of interactions with students and families. And we did request at the time to the mayor at the time to consider shifting those budgetary dollars to the district to compensate for us meeting the express needs of children and families with those dollars. And there was never a response. And so the city made the decision to continue to maintain those positions as assigned to our buildings for emergency planning. However, those emergency planning discussions do not entail any interactions with students or families, and are only involve walking the perimeter of the building and doing other trainings for, it's called ALICE training, for emergency situations that might happen in school buildings.
Jenny, do you have any follow-up thoughts or comments before we move on? And yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
I mean, it's just I guess it's just not clear to me that this is where we want to spend money. I don't know, but I'm not at all clear that I'm not on board at the moment.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on kind of the current, I'm gonna say relationship, but just what's happening with SROs at District 65 currently based on what we just heard from Board President Tanya Booty?
I mean, if they're not interacting with students, are the students seeing them, Anya? I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I think it's from I looking at the big picture of the department, I agree with Jenny in terms of like where our dollars are going. That doesn't seem necessary. I think that there's a way to fit into this new action plan, a way to make sure that schools are safe without having armed officers on campus. But yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to specify that this was not per request of District 65. This was
Yeah.
Per the resistance to the request of actually District 65. We did not see that it would be necessary to have officers assigned to our district because I perceive the public safety entity of the city to be obligated to provide public safety to our schools. Without having a particular subset of officers assigned to us. That was a decision by the department at the time about how they wanted to organize themselves. And what we asked what was within our purview in terms of the experience that children and families were having, and that we did not want children and families to be interacting with officers for any unnecessary, non-emergent reason in our buildings during the school day. And so that is the priority that we have as a district. The city of Evanston has decided how you all want to allocate dollars and organize your public safety department. But our expectation is that, the public safety department does serve our schools and our students and families in the case of emergent situations, but otherwise it's not necessary.
So I guess just for clarification, is the district supportive or not supportive of the SROs on the campus grounds, not inside but outside? Is that something the district supports or doesn't support?
What we support is the public safety department of the city supporting our schools for emergent situations. And what we were told by the City of Evanston's Public Safety Department was that in order for them to best do that, they would like to be available to do patrols on the perimeters of the building in ways that do not interact with children or families, and that they would like to have people assigned to emergency planning with us. If the City of Evanston can provide a public safety commitment to our children and families and to our schools in a different manner, then we're happy to negotiate that, but that was not what was promised or communicated at the time. And these were all publicly held board meetings and they're recorded, so there is a historical record of the discussions, and there should be a historical memory of these discussions within the City of Evanston as well.
Any other questions, comments?
I did have another question. Does anybody know where does Mayor Biss stand in regards to these 7 open positions with the police station? Because I think that one of the campaign promises he made, it was pertaining to defunding. And so I'm just curious as to where he stands on that, and if he's in alignment with, not hiring them, or is he now supporting it? And what is going to be, what actions do we have to make sure that, he's held accountable?
Yeah, I can't I'm not sure where Mayor Biss is on the issue. And, although he plays an important role in kind of establishing the agenda and kind of keeping order among the council members, he doesn't have a vote unless it's a tie vote and he needs to break it. So I am interested on his opinion on the matter, but I'm also interested in what my colleagues, the 9 other council members, how they feel on the issue. But we're still discussing it. I know we have some budget meetings coming up, and they're all public meetings, and we'll know soon how everybody feels about the issue. I know we discussed it at the last special city council meeting. I'm sure we'll hear from the police department as to why they believe we need to bring back on these staff members. So we'll have a lot of discussion moving forward on the topic. But yeah, I'm not sure where Mayor Biss stands on the issue at this point. Okay, so this is thank you so much, Sarah. This is really good information. Everybody has access to it. Again, this was an abbreviated version of a much longer, a much more detailed look into kind of reorganizing our police department and defunding our police department in a way that will help us and hopefully achieve better outcomes, which is what this is all about. And so we appreciate you, Sarah, for coming on. But everybody can access the action plan through the chat. It's in the chat. It's actually been posted, I think, twice there, and you can access it, read it. We'll have Sarah back on at future meetings to talk more about it. And I guess just to give you an update, and I touched a bit on this. We did send out an RFP. The city sent out an RFP for an emergency response program. As far as I understand, there were no responses to the RFP, and we just received an update at the Human Services Committee meeting, which I sit on and Councilman Reed sits on. And again, my position, unless I get information that would suggest we need to move in a different direction, is that we really should be bringing on staff to do that work as opposed to contracting out for it. And that's one reason why I wanted Sarah to present today, but also I want us to continue to think about how to bring on this alternative emergency response program or system into what we do as a city and really commit public dollars towards it, hire people on staff to do the work as opposed to contracting out for it. So you'll hear me and others, I'm sure, bringing that up at future meetings. And one thing we've also talked about a bit, and I'm still figuring out how to frame this discussion and who to bring on to talk about it, but a lot of the organizational theory that, especially around policing, points, at least me at this stage, to the idea that while it may be important to have a police chief or someone who is leading our public safety department that has a law enforcement background, I think it is equally important that we have a person in charge that's committed to is committed to and understands organizational theory, that understands that is a clinician, that understands kind of health outcomes overall. That's where I am now, just based on some of the research that I've been doing outside of this committee. And I'm trying to find the most appropriate way to bring that discussion to committee with experts on these different topics. And I'm probably a week or two away from being able to propose a lineup that I think could really speak to this group about the benefits of adding another position to our public safety strategy, a supervisory position that really could ensure that our police department is rooted in strong social science, that's rooted in understanding that how we structure our police department, our public safety department, has a lot to do with the incentives that are created, and incentives either make people do things that that support the public benefit, broadly speaking, or there are I think are currently incentives that are set up to make people protect one another and become further kind of insulated as they try to manage this job that gives you a lot of authority, but also comes with a lot of risks, whether it's perceived or real. It comes with a lot of risks, and I think this job of being a police officer, we've seen it in action for a while now. We know what it leads to. We know the type of person that it creates, and I think in order to shift aggressively away from that, we need to add a different individual that thinks about policing, that thinks about health outcomes, that thinks about public safety in a different way than I think what the institution of law enforcement currently produces. And that's not to say they wouldn't have a role, but I think the way we have talked about it is some type of co-leadership, with this new department that we're thinking about. So I'm just throwing that out there. Again, still trying to figure out how to effectively and appropriately bring that to the group. Happy to hear people's thoughts on that, just in case I'm moving in the wrong direction and we want to go in a different direction.
I have a question about, in response, just like if we could make maybe an action step for the next meeting, or, so we're not just like introducing ideas and then they kind of like don't come back up for a while, or like how we can continue to build on. Yeah, I don't know if that, am I making sense?
No, it does. That makes perfect sense. I think one of the steps is, I thought our alternative emergency response program was really looking at creating positions within the city of Evanston, and it's been discussed, but that's not where we're headed right now. And so I think one of the things we need to decide as a committee is if we want to continue to explore that, because even reading through the Evanston Fight for Black Lives action plan, it really calls for a city division within this public safety department that will respond to mental health related calls and calls related to sexual abuse and other calls. And right now, it doesn't seem like we have this alternative response committee that's thinking about this, but I think they're really focused in a few different directions as opposed to really looking at what does it look like to create these staffs in our to create these staffs within our current kind of infrastructure. And so I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves: is that something that we want to pursue or at least look into? And whether that's reassigning people, reassigning current police officers, which is what I think the EFBL model calls for, if it's something else. But I think that's an important question. Allison, I saw you made a chat. Let me.
Yeah, just that the violence prevention working group, the third, one of the three working groups in the Reimagining Public Safety Overall Committee, I think, is also like there's a lot of overlap between some of what we're talking about, what that working group is proposing, and the alternative response group. And basically, the overarching theme is like having people other than police officers do a lot of this work, and what that looks like might be slightly different in each of the groups, but there's a lot of overlap there. So I just wanted to reemphasize Kimberly's point, especially because with the violence prevention working group, I think we're getting to a place where we're about to make some proposals. So we'll have to see how that kind of overlaps with everything else.
And I'm sorry, if you could, where do you think there might be some more overlap? So I missed you're saying in what areas?
Yeah, just the idea of having non-police officers respond to whatever it is, right? So the alternative response committee I think had sort of a broader to-do list, and then now is focusing quite a bit on some of the mental health aspects of it. That's something that we in this working group have talked about a lot, is the mental health aspect of it, and the living room. That's a thread that's been common between those two working groups. And then the violence prevention working group is thinking about victim services and youth services and how those two work together and where they're located within the city organization, not within the police department. So we're all kind of talking about like different ways. Basically, I hate to use the term because it's what one of the working groups is called, but like alternatives to the alternative responses.
Yeah. And I think alternative responses are the most effective way to address some of the concerns we've heard over the last several years and even beyond, because it removes the responsibility away from an armed officer. And so that's mental health and sexual abuse, that's traffic, potentially. Nuisance complaints I also think is what we heard. And so I think if we want to make the biggest difference, we really have to make a decision as committees and as a council, like what responsibilities do we want to shift to unarmed public servants? And are we trying to contract out that work, or do we want to bring these folks on as full-time staff in the city of Evanston? And I'm not sure I have, even as a council member, a clear idea of where the council is at and where the committees are at. I know the data committee made a recommendation to some around how we respond to traffics, but I don't think it went as far as to say we shouldn't have armed public servants responding to traffic. Right. So, and maybe Allison, you can speak a bit more to that recommendation that came out of that I think is coming out of the data committee.
Yeah, that one is the only one that's in a way an outlier here, because it's not looking for different types of staff or different basically non-police officers to respond to certain events. So those recommendations are basically to have law enforcement not stop folks for equipment violations anymore, to ban consent searches, and then some recommendations and requests around data and how it's like collated and given back out.
Yeah, because Sarah, go ahead. Did you have some comments?
I just think that with the overlap, like I think looking at that org chart, how we were doing a couple months ago, is kind of what we should go back to, and really looking at each role, the dollars that go into each one, making a plan that's similar to the one that I just presented, but that we create as a committee, and really figuring out how we can reorganize those roles into what we want to see our public safety entity look like. Because I think if we're trying to just build on to what we already have without like changing what exists, like contracting out, but not getting rid of a set of people who work for EPD right now, or shifting them around, or getting them further educated and like taking those dollars into mitigating the root causes. Like, I feel like we're kind of looking at the reactions right now to calls rather than like preventing some of these things. And I think if our working group can really focus on every single position and role that exists within the department right now, and how that can either be transformed or just slightly changed, and then who the specific personnel within those roles are. And like, I just think that's where we have to start, so that we're not having 4 different conversations in groups that aren't talking to each other, but about the same idea.
I think it's a great point, with the understanding that we may be having similar conversations that people in other groups are having, but so be it. We may have to, I guess my point is, we may have to continue doing our work and and meet somewhere down the road unless we want to approach those groups and say, hey, you know, what are you doing? Here's what we're doing. What should we look into? What do you want to look into? And we certainly can take that approach. But I also wouldn't mind just trying to do our task to the best of our ability and seeing where we meet down the road. I'm curious to Councilmember Reed, Kimberly, what are your thoughts on what Sarah proposed in terms of a direction for the committee?
Well, I would love to see, I think Allison as well. We're both on the other violence prevention. It sounds like she may also be on the data. So I do see a lot of overlap, but I think that's okay. I think it's good that we're actually thinking of the same ideas, because hopefully when we're trying to sort of achieve consensus across all three, that, you know, there will be parallels and we won't really be looking at a lot of very different options. So I think that's really good that we're kind of arriving at some of the same conclusions. I guess what I would love to see is just, we've started in the other group, and when I say we, I really mean Allison, has started kind of framing out what we want to see. And so I wonder for this group, could we take some of the parts of what we just looked at from the document and add it on to maybe some of the other things we've talked about in our committee and start to frame up kind of what this new structure will look like. And then maybe you all can advise us on, I'm sorry, my son. You all can advise us on how we take it through the vetting process, if you will, and think about, you know, getting estimates of what it would cost to do something like this. You know, how do we actually go from idea to implementation? But I think a next step for us would be maybe a joint review at the next large reimagining public safety meeting, where we kind of talk about all the common themes that each group is coming up with. And then secondarily, our group sort of formalize our recommendations a bit.
Councilman Reed. And before Councilman Reed, before you go, Kimberly, you're not saying have recommendations for the next reimagining public safety committee meeting, are you? Or I just want to make sure I understand.
No, because that's like tomorrow, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, not yeah.
No, not that one. I'm thinking for like the next sort of group of this group, the next meeting of this group.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yep. And I think you and Sarah on this are in agreement then that we can start to put this thing together based on what we learned, try to put it together and see where we end up. So I think you're in agreement. And if we need people to, you know, subject matter experts and others to come in and provide more information, we can kind of schedule them as needed. Councilmember Reed, any thoughts on this direction?
No, I'm in agreement.
Okay. It is 7 p.m. I don't think we've ever concluded a meeting at the hour mark, so I'm gonna try to do that today. But I think we're clear that we want to start to frame out what this new department would look like at our next meeting. What I'll try to do is pull together what we've learned into the Google Drive, and I'll share that back out. But we had a Google Doc at one point that we were working off of. I'll try to move all of this to that document just so we have a good starting point. And then at the next meeting, we can kind of get to work putting together this new department. And if that sounds like a good next step, then yeah, we'll do that in between the meetings and look forward to a really interesting, I think, and important meeting for our committee. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are, let me look at my calendar. We're looking at not the 9th, but the 16th at 6 p.m.
Sounds good.
Is that good for everybody? Okay. If there's anything that you need, members, Sarah, Kim, Devon and whomever else I'm missing, just let me know and I can get that from the city. Thank you to everybody from the community for coming out to this meeting. We appreciate it. I think there were some, I just want to make sure I'm getting some other calls. I think also Anya had a question. Also, how will these priorities be elevated to the chief and city manager search? So we, our committee's recommendation was that we had this question early on. Our position on the police chief hire is that we should hold off hiring a police chief until we complete this work. And I think the interim city manager and Mayor Biss are in agreement with that. And if that changed, I know they would come to us and let us know, and we could have that discussion then. But we are certainly holding off until we finish this work. That's where we are now. Thanks. I'm gonna hop. Take care, Tyler. Hey, Allison. Thank you. So that was the one question. So again, thank you so much to community members who have come out. Again, this is a Rethinking Organizational Structure Committee, a subcommittee of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee. We're going to be back on not next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. I think I said that's the 16th at 6 p.m. Hopefully we see everybody back. And yeah, good night. Unless there's any other questions or comments, have a good night.
Thank you.
Matt, real quick before you close it out, I want to, somebody left me contact information from the ACLU. I want to make sure I get back to them. Okay, I got a good screenshot, Matt. I'm good.
Okay, great.
All right, Matthew, good night. Take care, okay?